Can't hear you, Thomas.
Okay. Thank you. So anyway, my name's Tom Meitzner. I'm the chair of the board for the Sienega Watershed Partnership. And thank you for coming to our lunch and learn today. Today we'll be talking about the pronghorn antelope of the Sonoita Plain. And our guest speaker will be Rana Tucker. And next month, hopefully on September 2nd, Doug Duncan of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will be joining us to talk about the fish of the watershed. One of the unique characteristics of the watershed is its sort of full complement of aquatic species from, what we would expect of a native assemblage in this region. But today, our speaker is Rana Tucker. She's a terrestrial wildlife specialist in game management in southeastern Arizona for the Arizona Game and Fish Department. Rana's responsibilities include coordinating and assisting with surveys and translocations of game species, reporting out the status of local game populations, educating the public, and assisting with the hunt recommendation process, among other duties. She also works part-time for the Arizona Antelope Foundation, maintaining their GIS database, making maps. Rana came to Tucson from northwestern Nebraska in 2013 to work for Arizona Game and Fish as the regional landowner relations manager, where she facilitated habitat projects before moving to the game specialist in 2018. Her background is in natural resource management, having worked for the Forest Service, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, during which time she had a master's degree from Chadron State College on bighorn sheep habitat modeling. Okay, so with that, I will turn over to Rana. Rana, you should have screen sharing capability. Oh, you're on mute.
How about now?
You're good now.
Okay, it's tricky on the phone. If you call in on your phone, you have to hit *6 to mute yourself or unmute yourself. Just a notice for everybody, because I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. Some folks still have microphones on. So let me start the share screen and get that going there. And then I can move this over there. Dealing with double monitors, it's a little weird. Okay, how's that? Does everybody see that?
Yes, at least I can.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you guys for having me come talk on your series. It sounds like a really great series, and I'm really interested in the work that Sienega Watershed Partnership is doing down there. As Tom mentioned, I am an employee of Arizona Game and Fish. I have a lot of responsibilities here with them, and I also work for the Antelope Foundation, keeping track of their database and making maps and things for them. So I'm here kind of on behalf of both, wearing both hats today a little bit. And I do want to mention that you cannot talk about pronghorn in the Sonoita Plains without talking about the influence that the Arizona Antelope Foundation has had there. So they kind of go hand in hand. Tom also mentioned that I came to Arizona via western Nebraska, and this is a very different world for me. In western Nebraska, you couldn't hardly spit without hitting a pronghorn. And it took me a while to fully appreciate what a rare treat it is to be able to drive down to Sonoita. And I go down there once or twice a month, and about every third trip, it seems like you see pronghorn along the highway, and it wasn't always like that. And so what I'm here today is to share a little bit of that story with you and tell you how we got to where we are today. Hopefully we can make that a fun journey. And so sorry if I stumble over myself a little bit. Talking to a blank screen is really weird for me. So we'll get through this. I want to start off with just a brief clip of a video that was produced by Arizona Game and Fish in 2015. And it's a wonderful video. It's a beautiful story. It's 13 minutes long. So I'm just going to show a minute of it. I have to switch over to video to do that. This one here. Here we go.
January morning in 2014, 40 pronghorn antelope captured in New Mexico were released in southeastern Arizona. 23 of them were returned to the wild near the small communities of Sonoita and Elgin. As they ran into the distance, they had no idea they were running to the rescue. They were brought here to help save a local herd of pronghorn that was at risk of dying out. The Sonoita-Elgin herd had been crashing hard, and by 2011, only a handful of animals remained. It's unclear exactly what caused the population decline, but growth and development, roads and fences are at least partially to blame. People are responsible for altering the pronghorn's historic habitat, but as you're about to see, they're also the reason why the Sonoita-Elgin herd is finally making a comeback.
Okay. Okay, there we go. So I highly encourage everybody to go to YouTube and look up that video. You can just search on YouTube for a triumph for pronghorn antelope. It has some really great footage and also explains some things that I'm not going to be able to do today, such as how we capture pronghorn and translocate them, those kind of things. So take a minute when you're done here today to look that up. I didn't want to take up the whole time with a video that somebody else already did. So just to orient folks that maybe aren't familiar with the Sonoita area and the Sonoita Plains, this is a map showing the Sonoita Plains, and that is the pink circle on the map there with Sonoita in the middle. Southern Arizona, this is the area that I manage, and we have 5 different herds of pronghorn antelope, 6 subherds if you count the ones that are not fully connected. And we're going to talk about the Sonoita one here today. The plains are bordered by the Santa Rita Mountain Range, the Whetstones on the east, and the Canelo Hills on the south, and I-10 to the north, although it's not very frequent that pronghorn make it up that far north because of the shrub cover there. You'll hear some reference in this talk today about game management units. These are the areas that different wildlife managers are responsible for. 34A and B are the ones that are north of Highway 82, north of Sonoita here, and 35A and B are south of Highway 82, just for reference. So I'm going to start with a brief history of Unit 35A and B. I wanted to start with 35, which is the unit south of Highway 82, because this herd is unique in that it never quite winked out. Early explorers and colonizers of Arizona recorded pronghorn all the way back, as early as the late 1800s. Most records will say that pronghorn were extirpated everywhere by the early 1900s. In this valley, some of the early settlers there, such as the Mr. Brophy that purchased the Baba Kamari Ranch in 1935, he noticed that pronghorn were reasonably common on the ranch. But by 1949, only 4 were surveyed there, and part of that reason he attributed to heavy snowfall. And if you look through some of our survey records, you'll see that there was some really extreme snowstorms across the state that year, and so it really had an impact on the herd south of Highway 82. So in 1947, the Arizona Game and Fish Department decided to try to supplement those herds. And for the next 4 years, they bolstered that population with some supplements. Those supplements did reasonably well. The population kind of dipped and peaked over the years, but averaged around 50 pronghorn or so for the next 60 years. But then again, in the late 2000s, we saw another drop. And in 2011, only 26 were surveyed in this unit. So in 2014, the decision was made to add to this population again. We translocated 31 pronghorn from New Mexico and Prescott and added them into this herd. I have a little bit more detail about that later. those years following that translocation were really excellent. In 2016, we surveyed 194 observed. That's where it peaked out. Just this last year in 2019, we observed 107 in the northern part of the valley, in the Sonoita Plains itself, and another 52 in the San Rafael Valley, which sits right down on the border and is connected to the herd. So north of Highway 82 and 34A and B, the story is a little bit different. We see the same scenario that the early explorers noted: a great many antelope grazing the luxuriant grasslands between the whetstones and the Santa Ritas. Unfortunately, this herd did completely disappear by 1946. So in 1981, following the success of the translocations that happened in the late 40s and early 50s, a translocation was completed in 1981, and they captured 51 pronghorn from Marfa, Texas, which we believe is the similar subspecies, the Chihuahuan subspecies of pronghorn that were resident in that valley prior to that, and translocated 51 into Unit 34. That population has done pretty well. They hovered around 80 during the 1990s. They did dip down to 20 to 50 in the late 2000s and early 2010s, but they kind of hung in there and have grown since the 2014 project up to 106 that we observed in 2019. Now you can find pronghorn both on the east and west side of Highway 83. That didn't used to be the case. They were primarily on the east side of Highway 83. I'll show you where that is here. Originally, when we did surveys, we would only find pronghorn in Unit 34B. Now they are able to cross both onto both sides of Highway 83 and reside in 34A and 34B, and there's also movement between 34 and 35. So let's go back to the dip in the population in 2011 and the years prior that prompted the translocation. As you can see here, when we do surveys, we fly transects about a quarter mile apart in a fixed wing airplane. This just shows the survey on the north side. I didn't want to clutter up the map too much. The black triangles represent our 2012 survey when we surveyed 103 pronghorn, and you can see how many different observations there were, how many groups there were. So just the following year, we surveyed the same protocol, but we only saw 3 groups of pronghorn in Unit 34 and 5 groups in Unit 35 for a total of 47. And so we knew there was an issue here, and a supplement was needed, but we also needed to identify what was causing the decline in the population. The major factor in this area is habitat fragmentation and loss of connectivity. The pronghorn that are out there need to be able to move about freely, hence the Arizona Antelope Foundation's motto, Libertas ad vagor, which means freedom to roam, so that they're able to exploit the best food and cover available. And they also have to be able to find water. If there's no water, they can't nurse fawns, and our fawns don't do well. So the need to address those issues was kind of brought to light, looking at what can we do to boost the numbers here and make it possible to translocate some more pronghorn in the area. So this is a pretty big task, and something that honestly Game and Fish could not do by itself. Thank goodness for the Arizona Antelope Foundation. This is a group, a non-government organization that is focused on conservation of pronghorn. They're dedicated to the welfare of pronghorn, and there are multiple organizations like this across the state. I would personally argue that this is the most active one. They have a lot of volunteers and are out on the landscape doing projects all the time. So as you can see, their mission is to actively seek to increase pronghorn populations in Arizona through habitat improvements, habitat acquisition, translocation of animals, and also they publicly comment on activities that would affect pronghorn in their habitat. So in 2010, Mr. Glenn Dickens from the Antelope Foundation submitted a grant proposal to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. You'll hear them called NFWF quite a bit, with the following 5 goals in mind. He wanted to build a database to prioritize grassland projects, identify travel corridors and remove or modify barriers such as fences or shrubs and trees that are impeding the line of sight for pronghorn, making it hard for them to detect and evade predators, target and plan grassland treatments and burns, supplement at least one population and increase numbers in two of the other subpopulations I showed you earlier across the southern part of the state, and also to improve grassland habitat in 5 of the subpopulation zones. So their first award was in 2011 from NIFWF for $230,000. And subsequently, they also obtained another grant from the BLM in 2013 for $80,000. And in 2015, they had done so well with the funding that they received in 2011 that they received an additional grant of $200,000. All in all, just in the Sonoita area, they were able to modify 60 miles of fence. They added 8 permanent water sources, which made over 100,000 acres in the Sonoita Plains accessible to pronghorn. Volunteers contributed lots of time and many, many miles towards these projects. Habitat Partnership Committee funds also went into some of these projects, and rancher contributions as well, which means they were able to match that $330,000 with $1.1 million in match. So the total expended across all of southern Arizona in all of those herds was $1.58 million, which is a huge accomplishment. So I wanted to show you some pictures of what these guys do when they go out. They're volunteers. A lot of the pictures here show them making barbed wire fence pronghorn friendly, raising it to standard, which means a smooth wire on the bottom. As some of you may know, pronghorn don't like to jump fences. They very, very rarely do it, if at all. They much prefer to go under, but what that means is if you have barbed wire that's too low, they can't get under at all. If it's just high enough for them to squeeze under, a lot of times it'll leave cuts on their back, and those can get infected. So in order to make it easier for them to cross, especially if they're in a hurry, if they're being chased by predators, they're not going to go under a fence. They're going to go through it, and it just messes them up. So to make it easier for them, you remove the bottom wire of barb and you replace it with a smooth wire, and that's really all it takes. It needs to be 16 to 18 inches off the ground to make it easy for them. But this is a task that can easily be done if you have a lot of hands on the ground to go out and do this work. So this is what they have done over the last 7 years. Like I said, they modified 60 miles of fence. This is a map showing the fence work that was done across the Sonoita Plains. The green lines represent fences that were modified with the BLM youth grant. So youth went out and did 25 miles of fence across the valley. That's what the green lines represent. The blue are volunteer projects, and then the red line represent a fence that a ranch in the area decided to do on their own. You also see some markers on this map for waters that are available to pronghorn. The purple triangle waters are waters that the Habitat Partnership Committee funding was used towards. The Habitat Partnership Committee, if you're not familiar with that, it's a group of interested parties, I want to say, non-government workers, government workers, local citizens. What they do is collect funds that are raised by the NGOs like Antelope Foundation. Those funds are raised at a banquet where they auction off a special hunting permit specifically for the species that the NGO is managing. So the Antelope Foundation receives a hunting permit every year. They auction it off. Those funds come back to the Habitat Partnership Committee, and then ranchers or land management agencies can apply to those funds to do projects that would specifically benefit that species. And so through the use of those Habitat Partnership Committee funds, they were able to put in 8 waters, which are represented by those purple triangles. And those aren't necessarily new waters. A lot of times what happens is the old well goes down or the windmill doesn't work and it needs a better power source. And so they were able to put in solar panels to fund those. They can increase the storage on those by adding storage tanks or pipe it to a place where pronghorn can get to it easily. They can also clean out dirt tanks. Some of these other dots on the map, the green dots, represent other water sources available to pronghorn. 2 of those, for example, I know of are rainwater catchments that were installed by Arizona Game and Fish. So as you can see, water sources were greatly improved over time in this area as well. So in 2014, when we decided it was okay to go ahead and bring some pronghorn here, the release sites that were chosen were in 35 because 34 was relatively stable and doing well. And also there was just a great amount of work done in 35 between the fence modifications and the water resources. So they chose 2 different release sites here on the map. You can see them in the bright green with the tags. One was on the Rose Tree Ranch and one was on the Babakamari Ranch. And they also had a 3rd release site down in, this is the San Rafael Valley, south of the border, across the Canelo Hills from the Sonoita Plains. So I wanted to demonstrate the good that this work has done, and I thought the best way to do that was to show you just prior to the transplant. In 2012, we observed 107 pronghorn in the Sonoita Plains, and so these blue dots on the map represent the distribution of those 107 pronghorn. This map shows you today's survey, which are the green stars. The 2012 survey are the black squares on this map. And what you see here is an improvement not just in the numbers of observations or the numbers of groups and the numbers of pronghorn. As you can see, we saw 213 pronghorn last year, but also in their distribution. They are much more spread out and able to use much more of the available habitat and are connected thanks to the fence modifications and brush removal projects and water developments in the area to make sure that they're safe and can reproduce happily in the valley. So in full, moral of the story is that it takes a village to raise a lot of pronghorn. There are a lot of people that went into this work, and I think without the combined efforts, we wouldn't be where we're at today with these animals. They're doing really well, and given we get a little more rain, hopefully they'll keep doing well. That is all I have. I will take questions if anybody has any.
Yeah, so if you have questions, I'm going to go ahead and let you unmute yourself for now. You can also put questions in the chat box, and I'll handle them as well. So.
How many people have been to Sonoita and seen the funky horn buck?
Yeah.
He's my favorite. He's got horns about like this. Betty Dickens showed me a photo in our last survey, and it completely blew my mind.
So some questions are coming in the chat. So Tricia Garrett was asking, is there a connection to the Fort Huachuca population of pronghorn?
No, the fences in the Fort Huachuca area prohibit movement between those 2 herds, and there's also been some development on the
Rana,
southern part of their ranges that don't allow that. Yes, sir.
Rana, am I on?
Yes,
yeah, no. Yes, Fort Huachuca is available. She doesn't remember. In 2010, we, with permission from the base, went in and modified 1.25 miles of the northwest boundary. And that was an impediment. That in fact is where the antelope came from on the Babakamari, from those releases on Fort Huachuca in the 40s. But after bison were put there, there was concern about bison calves and brucellosis. So they actually put woven wire fence all around that western boundary. And so we removed that. And then we have actively removed the fences, modified the fences on the research ranch. They did that on their own. So they do connect. We've had one sighting after the release in 2014. 4 or 5 antelope did show up for a while on the west boundary. They were observed by 2 people that were professionals that knew what they were looking at, and they were there. So we would expect with this expansion, and we're over 250 antelope total, we'd expect them to go on to there. But that was actually pre-grant, and we used Tombstone High School kids to modify that one, I think in 2010 or 2011, but yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Glenn. Sorry about that.
So Netson Steckless, I hope I said that right. Apologies if I didn't. Is asking, is there a population goal?
We've reached that goal, and they're pushing well over that. I think you want 100 to 125 for a sustainable herd in any area. So they're doing well. Okay.
And then the other distinction here, prior to the grant, we had three distinct subpopulations. We had basically the Baba Kamari herd. We had the herd north of 82 and the herd south of 82 on Rose Street. We now have 105,000 acres of functioning metapopulation. And what that means is genetically, the antelope that are up near Allison's house north of Gardner Canyon, genetically are connected to Pronghorn on the Baba Kamari. And there was another map that Rana has that shows the distribution of some of the ear-tagged antelope. And so we do have data showing that they are all across the plains. But again, so it's one metapopulation, but over 250. And she's correct. What we hope for is 100 to 125. And the reason you want that minimum number is to keep the genetic viability as high as possible. And the 125, the idea is if you get 25% fawns to does like we did this year, you're going to lose about 1 in 4. You're going to gain 1 in 4. So that's that bottom that you're always looking for.
Okay, Ron Adams has 2 questions. The first one is, do the pronghorn compete with cattle for food?
For the most part, no. They're not technically grass eaters. They rely more on forbs than the grasses themselves. They do rely on grass cover for hiding their fawn. So especially in critical periods, we like to see more grass on the ground specifically for that reason. That's more of a spatial competition than a food competition. Otherwise, as far as water and that kind of thing goes, they'll water right up next to cattle. So they're not a huge competitor as far as like a food and resource standpoint. They just need that cover out on the plains.
Okay. And then Rob's other question is, how many hunting permits are allowed? It seems strange to restore them and then hunt them. So
we have very limited numbers in that area. Glenn probably knows the numbers off the top of his head. I don't have them in front of me.
It's one of the most limited takes in a state as far as the numbers of pronghorn, what they would ordinarily. There are 5 permits now. There are 2 permits that are archery only, north of Highway 82. I just fibbed you. And there's 7 total. So then there's 5 permits that are south of 82, and 2 of those are archery and 3 are firearms, rifle firearms. What restricts hunting of that population, obviously, is the urban interface and the safety of both homeowners as well as highways, etc. So it's going to be a population that is harvested very lightly, and I think 99.99% of the value of that population is non-consumptive. It's an opportunity, as you all know that are residents down there, to have that climax grassland species available. And all of you that are locals have seen probably hundreds of times the number of people pulled over with their phones recording pronghorn. Another characteristic of this herd that is quite unusual, and it started after the release in 14, is again, locals that have been down there, you'll note that they're not afraid of you. They'll allow you to come up within 35 yards. Cars can stop. And this is a very interesting characteristic. And it's a learned behavior. And now virtually every antelope on the plains looks at a truck and just shrugs. And so that increases its value, of course, for non-consumption. And it gives those people the opportunity with their cameras to get out and literally walk over to the fence. And what you'll see with some of them, they'll just move 35 yards. And that's kind of their safe zone. And they're teaching that to each generation, so we can expect that to go forward. It's really a very interesting population in that sense, but it's a very limited harvest, so it's 7 permits to answer your question.
AZ Antelope doesn't promote.
And Arizona Antelope Foundation, just let me quickly make that point. Betty just spoke to me. We are not a hunting organization. Thank you, Rana, for showing our mission. We're about putting antelope back. And we fight vigorously to have pronghorn on private property where there is no hunting allowed. And a lot of our effort here in southeastern Arizona, 60% of the pronghorn occur on private property. And of that, upwards of 1/3 of that is not available to hunters. But that did not change us working there. Modifying fences, putting waters in, and trying to have them back, again, to keep that metapopulation level. Thank you.
Okay. see. Trying to sort of sort through here first. Okay. What are sort of the next projects you all are looking at?
You know, we have a landowner relations program specialist that works directly with the landowners to try and identify projects. Part of the big focus is maintaining any of the brush management work that was done. So right now, if you're driving south to Sonoita, on the east and west sides of the highway there, just as you're coming towards town, you can see where mesquites have been removed in the past. They have been pulled up out of the ground to improve visibility and also grass and forb cover. Those resprout or sprout from new seeds in the ground relatively quickly, and so it's really important to maintain those and keep knocking back the little shrubs so you don't end up with the same shrub cover. So I know of some active work doing that in the valley. If ranchers are willing to have their fences modified, there's always fencing to be done. Other than that, that's the couple that I'm aware of. I don't know if Glenn knows of anybody that have any.
You're absolutely correct. Our focus now, and this is throughout southeastern Arizona, is in maintenance of grasslands. There's over 20,000 acres of mesquite that have been removed in Bonita, for example. And so one of the things we're encouraging and we're working towards with most of the ranchers, and Habitat Partnership money is eligible for this expense, is to purchase reagent for basically removing mesquites safely. And so we are now spending money maintaining and getting rid of those small mesquites you see. So our first priority now for the rest of southeastern Arizona is going to be maintaining the current grassland. And then Rain is exactly right. These antelope are showing us, these pronghorn antelope are showing us where they want to be. And so we thought we were done with fences until last year. And then they decided they wanted to go halfway to Parker Canyon. And so we dealt with yet another landowner, and we got a Boy Scout troop that modified 1.5 miles. And so now antelope, pronghorn can safely go literally to Canelo. But they caused us, they wanted to do that. They were fighting that fence and fighting that fence. Then her other point about water is that we're funding water security. We are doing some tank cleanouts, but as you're seeing, you know, windmills are a thing of the past. They're a relic. And what we find now with our current drought situation and global warming is earthen tanks are no longer secure. So we're also, the next focus would be water security. So kind of those two, probably maintain grasslands, water security, and then as the pronghorn talked to us, we would still come back and put a project in. Would prairie dogs help keep that shrub growth down? Because I understand they want a clear line of sight. The answer is absolutely. And prairie dogs, in particular the Gunnison's prairie dog, because, excuse me, the blacktail, it evolved in a mesquite environment. They girdle those trees. They actually, the little seedlings that are 1, 2, 3 years old, they will actually go out of their colony and they will girdle that tree and kill it. And that was observed in Mexico, northern Mexico, when they went down. Oh. Who are we talking about now?
Range riders.
So Alex,
yes, Netson, it's a pleasure to know you're still around. The 10-year grant just got published. Literally, it's being published. And we thanked you and the range riders in there. We included Caitlin's article, actually as part of the 100 pages in print. And Netson, if you'll get me your email afterwards, I'll make certain you get a copy. It's coming off the press probably this week. But you're in there. You guys are listed.
Okay. There was a question here about sort of the wider distribution. Is that from increasing population, or is it also, have you documented individuals dispersing out to new locations as well?
Yeah, that has happened. It's a little bit of both. As the population increases, those animals are looking for new places to go and go exploring, and with the habitat modifications and the fence improvements, it makes it possible for them to do that. So yeah, we have seen pronghorn moving into zones that we hadn't seen them in recent history anyway.
And sort of with that, the Fort Huachuca population was originally is hypothetically distinct except for this fence work. Was that a reestablished population as well, or?
Yeah, yes. as Rana correctly touched on, I studied these pronghorn when I was U of A in 75, 76. I had an extensive survey with that time, Frank Brophy Sr. And he recalled there were up to 200 antelope on his ranch. And of course, they very vigorously defended those antelope. But they used to migrate over to Gardner Canyon. And so it was in sometime 43, 44, 45. It was during the war. And that larger bunch went over there. And when they came back, he talked about fewer than a couple of dozen. And likely they were harvested. They were eaten by miners or somebody went to work on them as far as providing meat. So when those came back and went 1947, when they were released on Fort Huachuca, there was still one buck and 3 does that were very near the Baba Kamari headquarters. The sad part was, is that that buck was found hung in a fence at the same time they were doing the release. So we had probably 3 does that were still there. And those were brought in, by the way, from the Coconino Plateau out of Flagstaff. If you're a splitter, those were Americanus americanus. The department has gone to great effort to bring Chihuahuan ensis in, and that's from Texas, Marfa area. The antelope that Rana spoke to, those came from Cimarron, New Mexico, and they're Mexicana. And the release that was done in 1984, north of 82, that 100 antelope were also Mexicana. They were from Marfa, Texas. Another thing worth pointing out, and she knows this, there's a map that we have now that shows it. We have recorded pronghorn that are moving, interchanging between the San Rafael Valley and the west pasture of the Baba Kamari fence. We have not fewer than 6 individuals that have gone one way or the other in the past 3 or 4 years. So they are developing a herd memory of their own. And those populations did not know either one were there previously. But when we stirred them up, we put in New Mexico pronghorn that regularly went between summer range and winter range over 25 miles. So they went looking. And Betty and I, 3 years ago, we were missing about 14 antelope in the west pasture of the Baba Kamari. We went down to the Meadow Valley and they were standing there and we photographed them. That's the photo that Rana showed. All of those antelope, including their subadults and the yearling bucks that you see there, they were raised. They had spent 3 years on the Baba Kamari Ranch. So between them now, I think there's going to be some regular exchange in spite of all of the oak and the fences. It's amazing what we don't know about these ungulate movements. And these are explorers. So, yeah, it's fun.
Pioneers.
Cool. Not sure. I think that's all the questions that we had from the chat. Hold it. Cool. So I'm curious about the fence work. You know, what does that involve in terms of physically, and how does that facilitate the pronghorn movement more broadly across the landscape?
Well, as you know, or has probably seen driving along fence lines, you have the heavier posts that are anywhere from 16 to 20 feet apart, and they'll have 4 strands of barbed wire strung across them. And then they have these little wire stays that kind of keep the wires from twisting together. And so if you're going to make the fence pronghorn friendly, what you have to do is pull up those old stays, those wire stays, or just cut them and pull them out of there. The main posts stay up, but you have to unclip the bottom wire and take that off and roll it up, get rid of it, replace that with a new smooth wire. And then also what we do is change the gap between the very top wire, especially if it's a really high wire. Sometimes we can talk the rancher into letting us bring it down a little bit. Bring that down some, but then make the gap between the first and the second wire a 12-inch gap. And that's so that if deer or a God forbid a pronghorn actually jump a fence, if they're going over it, they run less risk of putting one of their legs through it and then getting caught up in that first and second wire. So once we've expanded that gap in the top and brought the bottom wire up and put barbed wire, the other 2 barbed wires are just spaced kind of evenly in the middle. Then you have to put the wire stays back in and connect the wires to the fence. So it is really labor intensive and has to move kind of progressively because you're often dealing with half a mile to a mile to 2 miles of fence all at once. And so you know, Glenn and John Milliken have done a really good job of lining those projects out and getting a team of people together that have experience. And like the first guys will go out and pull the bottom wire or pull the stays. The second guys will go through and mark the posts. They have a wooden dowel with the markers on it for where the wires need to be, and you chalk on those things. And that way, when you're going and putting that wire back up and reclipping them, you can put them right on those marks. So it's a fun process. I've done two or three of them with the foundation, and it's a great event. They do these regularly. They don't just do them in southern Arizona. They also do them Vico Valley and up in Big Lake and up other areas where there's other pronghorn. And so they do 2 to 3 of those projects a year. I highly encourage folks to look them up and sign up for a project. Go out with them. And these are great guys, and they're hard.
I just sent the email link, and if you folks will sign up on our email link, you'll get notices, COVID notwithstanding. You'll get our notices on projects. And to Rana's point, we don't touch a fence any longer. I've been with them 10 years, and they were doing random fence projects. Now we don't touch a fence unless it's part of a larger landscape. And so effort. We're right now just initiating, but COVID has cost us the season. We do 5 projects a year. We used to do 2 down here, 1 in Bonita and 1 in Sonoita. And so now we do 1 at Big Lake for the Big Lake Summer Complex. We do, and that's in June, wonderful time to be at Big Lake. And scheduled right now, we were scheduled for April and September to work northwest of Seligman. And that's a monster project. We've got $2.8 million going into that through NRCD grants. And the Kingman Region of Game and Fish is running that. We have our south of I-40 complex, and that's being driven. The fences that are being removed are as a result of radio collar data. And our 5th one is our endangered species one. We're working in Vico Valley, which is south of Casa Grande. We're very excited there. We were asked to remove 55 miles of fence. We've removed about 20, but that is actually going to have a endangered species. We're going to have a pronghorn release in December. And in October and November, we're actually building a 20-acre compound to house those animals. And this is going to be, it's a major move to put endangered pronghorn, Sonoran pronghorn on the eastern edge of their range. So everything we do, like I say, it's part of a bigger piece. But by statute, basically, we have to do 4 projects a year. Otherwise, we don't exist. We're not just around to sell a tag or have a banquet or raise money. But I'd encourage all of you to go to that link that I sent, and if you'll sign up. And then also you can read all of our magazines. And we have 20 years of magazines there if you want to look back at our quarterly magazines. So
those are great publications. They do some really fun raffles too, guys. So their newsletters aren't just news; they're fun stuff you can win too.
So Netson was asking if you've seen any wider ecosystem changes now that the population has increased substantially.
I can't really think of any off the top of my head. One of the aspects of bringing this population back that I didn't mention that's covered in the video is some targeted coyote removal, particularly during, it only happens during fawning season, and that's a chance to get those fawns a chance to get on the ground and get big enough to be really mobile, because when they're really little, they hunker down and try to hide, and coyotes are really effective at sniffing them out and killing them, and they'll kill up to 75% of your fawns a year. So every couple of years, there's a project, we'll have a trapper or a hunter go in and target coyotes during that fawning season to give those fawns a boost. And so what we have noticed is that the mule deer in the area, our fawn to 100 doe ratio for mule deer has increased at the same time that the pronghorn do. And so the mule deer are definitely benefiting from some of that work. But bigger ecosystem wise, I'm assuming the brush management work is improving things for mule deer and also for prairie dogs in the area as well. Those are species that need to be able to see really well around them. The added benefit of shrubs and grasses that come back in the mesquite encroached areas, that's going to be more of an ecosystem level type change related to work done for pronghorn. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. And of course, the waters too, going in, those will benefit other animals as well.
And then someone asked, what are the challenges you face with the public in caring for the pronghorn?
I might need a little more clarification on that one.
I mean, just, you know, have you, I guess I interpreted that as like, are there, is there pushback from the public? How do you all work to get the public engaged and participating, you know?
I can answer part of that. We did a survey, and it is published in our upcoming, the survey was published. If you'll look at our last magazine that is posted, we had a human dimensions survey conducted by a grad student from the Warford College. And she was an intern working for Ron Pullman on Borderlands. And Ron and she were driving through Sonoita, and he told her about the Pronghorn project. She got a hold of me and said, how can I help? So we designed the survey together, and she went out and she interviewed all of the local businesses, ranchers, vineyards, real estate departments, etc. And so if you'll look at that magazine, let's see, it's I think that survey's in there, but the bottom line is it was everybody supported and felt that bottom line Pronghorn increased the value of the plains. It improved their business outcomes, and that they were aware, most were aware of the projects. So it was a very high success rate in all groups. There were a couple people that were misinformed. They thought that mule deer were antelope and therefore causing depredation on vineyards. And that's not true, we know that. And then there were some objections to the coyote removal, but to reinforce what Rana said, that's very targeted. It's 3 years on and 3 years off. That only occurs from 1st of April through the end of June. And it's intended to, again, give those fawns the opportunity to get up to life stage. What I also would suggest, there are 4 studies in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and coyotes remove 80 to 90%, given the opportunity, of the fawns. And the one herd there in the Babakamari Ranch, to give you an idea, in 9, 10, and 11, it crashed from 26 animals to 18. 0 fawns survived. Our gentleman went in there, removed 7 coyotes, and the next spring we had 14 pronghorn survive. But again, it's not every year. It may have to be long term if we're going to keep that 100 threshold.
Yeah. And Netson asks, is the goal to have a MVP to support their role in the ecosystem or to support hunting? I'm not sure what MVP means. I guess most valuable player. I don't know.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Either way by that.
Yeah, I mean, he's sort of wondering why the effort on pronghorn. Is it for support hunting? Is it,
Oh no.
I think they're pretty. So
it's both. It's tied together. They have an important role in the ecosystem. They also, being a very visible herd, as Glenn mentioned, brings public awareness to pronghorn in Arizona, and they might become more interested in what their needs are and support conservation goals. Hunting is an important part of the picture, though, too, because a lot of times it's those hunters that are most aware of pronghorn's needs and are willing to go out and put their time and money on the ground and do this kind of conservation work. So it's a little bit tied collectively. You can have, populations that are hunted, but it also, those types of populations also create a reservoir for things like translocations, where if we have a population in one area that goes down for some reason, then we have a good source somewhere else. So we do establish populations from time to time that just are for that particular benefit. But by and large, hunting plays a huge part in conservation here as well. So as long as it's a big enough population to support the hunting, which we keep very close tabs on, like I said, we fly every year, every other year, and survey and see how many bucks we have out there compared to the number of does. We have very specific guidelines that say if you have this many bucks per 100 does, it is safe to remove a percentage of those bucks. And so we keep tabs on that, and that's how we formulate our recommendations for the number of permits every year.
Rana, why don't you touch on the 50 antelope we rescued up at Prescott and put over near Bonita?
Sure. So this is not specific to Sonoita, but there was a population up near Prescott, Arizona that had dwindled significantly because of development and was facing getting boxed in entirely by houses. And so in January of 2019, we went up and captured 46 6 of those. 45 of them made the transplant and were distributed in Bonita and San Bernardino Valley and also over in Altar Valley. And the ones in Altar Valley are particularly interesting because they are wearing, 2 of them have radio collars or VHF GPS collars that collect their location 4 times a day and send it up to a satellite. And so we're getting some really interesting information on the habitat that they use down there, which allows us to expand work and try to get enough available habitat restored down there that we could do another transplant there as well.
You can also go online and look at, it's called A New Home for Prescott Valley Pronghorn. It's a February 1, 2019 Arizona Game and Fish YouTube, and we'll cover that. And again, the DNA, their genetics was very desirable, and that's why the Game and Fish Department made a decision to, with those 45 animals, put them in 5 different herds. And so also, I'll back up, 10 years ago, genetically, we were very concerned about genetic narrowing in all these subpopulations. All of that has been resolved as a consequence of both releases. All of those zones did get new DNA, and it's Arizona DNA and New Mexico. So A New Home for Prescott Valley Pronghorn. I can type that in. Thank you.
Okay. Trish was just asking, what happens to one that weren't captured up in Prescott?
With a minimum number, with minimal numbers, the existing habitat that's there will hopefully support them. I don't know if there's plans for any future translocations. Maybe they'll find their way out or through to some of the other herds. I'm not super familiar with that herd as that's in another region, but that's kind of what I think was discussed for what was left.
Here.
Okay. So.
Okay.
Well, what happened to the ones you didn't capture in Prescott? That's a question. There was an administrative decision made it was impossible for the Game and Fish Department to catch every one. So that herd had crashed from about 110 animals down to the day we captured about 70, and they were dying as a result of road kills. The department made a decision along with local business leaders, et cetera, that they would not remove all of the antelope. So part of that was politics. And so we left at least 15 to 20. And the short answer is they will wink out. That's the answer. They won't, they are literally dying as a result of a subdivision. The advantage you have on the Sonoita Plains is there's enough public-private partnership that in spite of our urban interface, there's no reason we won't continue to have pronghorn as long as it still rains properly. We can make it, and it's largely this partnership effort that's caused that. But those others will wink out. They're gone.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know Rana has a 1 o'clock meeting she needs to get to. I'll just note again, let's thank Rana. Nice clapping emoji on your panel.
Thanks to Glenn, too, for kicking in. He's got so much more expertise with these herds down here.
Yeah, y'all were a good tag team. And I'll just note the next one of these will be September the 2nd. And like I said, we hope to have Doug Duncan. He's tentatively said yes, but I need to finalize that before saying absolutely he'll be here. So until then, thank you all for coming. And this is recorded, and we will post it to our webpage one way or another. So thank you very much.
Have a great day.
Bye.